Well, we've got our player's gun in, and the player can now fire the bullet. We're going to add a timer so that they have to fire the bullet on a specific timer. We're also going to talk about warnings a little bit in this lecture. It's going to be mostly review, but the warnings will be a little bit new and something I figured would be good to fit into this smaller lecture. Come into your player, and we're going to add a new timer node, and we'll call this bullet. What did I call it again? Fire bullet timer. Come into the player. We'll come up into our onReady vars, get access to this timer onReady var bullet fire timer. Wait, what? Fire bullet timer. Fire bullet timer. That's what we want. Okay. Once we've done that, we can take out the just pressed. So we can just do if action is pressed right here. And we can say and fire bullet timer dot time left equals 0. If there's no time left. Then we will come down in here to fire bullet. We'll say fire bullet timer dot start. So we'll start the timer when we call fire bullet. Okay, let's set our timer. This is basically going to be your fire rate. So we'll set this to 0.25. So we can fire a bullet every quarter of a second, and we can't fire anymore. Why is that? Well, that's technically because our timer is not set to one shot, so it will always start over and over and over and over and over again. So once we start the timer, once it reaches 0, it will start over again. And so we need to fix that. We'll just set one shot equal to true. So it won't start again until we actually fire the bullet, and then it will call start and start again. Once one shot is equal to true, you can see we can now hold down the mouse button and rapid fire at whatever rate we've got set up. Perfect. Now let's talk about warnings. The first thing you should know is that warnings are not errors. So if you look down in our debugger, some of you may have already looked into this, been curious about it. It says we have 2 errors here. Well, that's not exactly true because the little yellow dot here indicates that these are actually warnings. They're not error messages. If they were errors, they would be red. However, warnings are extremely helpful, and I highly recommend not just ignoring them. So for example, this one right here, the argument viewport is never used on the function. And if we click on this warning, it will take us to that location. You can see it's being passed in a viewport, but we never use that. Well, in this case, since it's a function with a signal, it has to pass in this variable. So even if we don't use it, we have to pass it in. Well, in this case, we can click on this little, warning sign here, and we can actually click this ignore button. I always have to click it twice for some reason. But once we do that, it puts this comment here that will ignore this unused argument. And for this case, we want to do that. Let's go to argument delta is never used in the function process. We'll go to that one as well. Okay, well this one also process has to use this argument. It has to have delta because it's a built-in function of Godot. It's not one of our own functions. So we have to pass in this function. We can't remove it or else we're going to have error messages, right? But we're never going to use it. At least we're not going to use it in our current line of thinking because we're setting the rotation manually. We don't have to multiply that by delta or anything because we're just setting it to what we want at every single frame. So this is another one that we want to ignore. And once we've done that and we clear up here, let's clear those. If we run our game, we'll no longer get those warning messages. And our debugger will be nice and clean. You can also ignore these by coming up into project settings, general, debug, GDScript, and you can see you can disable or enable specific warnings or all warnings. I've just left this at default. And I honestly recommend you do the same. You can turn off warnings if you want to, but I have found them to be useful for cleaning up my code. And let me give you an example. So let's say we have this move function and we're like, oh, you know what? I bet we need to use delta here in this move function. So then we have delta there and then we have delta here, right? But then, oh, move and slide with snap already uses delta built in, so it's never actually going to use delta. But we didn't know that when we made the function, right? Let's pretend. Let's pretend we didn't know that when we made the function. We thought we were going to use delta. But then later on, you run your game, and you get a warning message, and it's like, the argument delta was never used in the function move. And we go click on that warning message, and we go, you know what? We actually don't need to use that variable. You know, we never used it, and that's because we don't need to. We thought we were going to need it, but we didn't. So that's a case where the warning message will help you to clean up your code, because this is just unused data that's getting passed around. So we'll be like, okay, let's remove that and come up here where we call the function and remove it as well. And it will help you clean up your code that way. So that's an example of how warnings can help you clean up your code. And they warn about a lot of different things, so pay attention to them, try and read them and understand them, and use them because they are useful. Once again, unfortunately, stuff like delta here, or like in the example that we had before, right? Here, you can't remove this delta because this is a built-in function in Godot that has to have that argument. It's getting passed in. We can't actually change that. But if it's one of our own functions that we've made, or another thing it will do is warn you of unused variables. So we'll call this variable test equals 0. You know, maybe we thought we were going to use this variable, but then we never did end up using it. It's just an extra variable that we're never going to use, right? Well, look at this. It tells us the test is declared but never used in the script. We could use this warning to help us. However, you'll want to be careful to make sure that you don't actually use this in any other places as well, because sometimes you'll create a variable that you don't use inside of this script, but you do use it somewhere else, and maybe that's a bad thing too, but you just want to be wary that you don't delete a variable that you may actually need. And you can do Control-Shift-F to search for something in your code. So let's say we're searching for the test variable. Oh, it doesn't exist, but let's say we search velocity. Here we go. Here are the different instances of where velocity is located. And that's Control-Shift-F. So that will help you to refactor and clean up your code as well. Hopefully you enjoyed this lecture. It was a short one, but I think a fun one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.